When was the last time you got really angry or upset at your kids, or you were visibly emotionally frustrated? Well, isn't it easy in that moment to blame our emotional state on our kids? Isn't it easy to say, man, I wouldn't be so frustrated if you just would get your jobs done? Well, we've all been there. We all do that. But I want to just remind us of some things that we already know in regards to where do our emotions come from. And so have you ever had an experience where you're in the middle of something is, life is good, and all of a sudden you have a thought and you realize you forgot to do something, or you forgot to go somewhere, you forgot to pick something up? What do you feel the moment you have that thought? Well, you'd already forgotten it. You already didn't do it. But notice how quickly the emotional response comes the moment you remember it and realize it. Again, say you forgot to pick up your kid from school, which is not a fun place to be. Well, he was already forgotten about and you weren't feeling those emotions. But the moment you realized it, generally as human beings, we have a flood of emotions, okay? And is it your child that you forgot that caused that emotion? Because things were fine until you just realized it. It was the actual thought that you had that created those emotions, because our emotions come from our thoughts about whatever's going on, our interpretations, the lenses we use to see the world around us. And, have you ever been in a situation where you were speeding and all of a sudden you pull up right next to a cop, or you pass a cop on the highway who's using the radar gun, and then all of a sudden you have that, your heart just drops and you have that emotional reaction? Well, the cop was already there. You were already speeding. What caused that quick emotional reaction in that moment? You've been speeding for a while now. Why all of a sudden that, oh no? Well, again, because in that moment, your thoughts created that emotional state. It was already going on. You were already speeding. But in that moment, when you saw that cop, how you interpreted that situation, the meaning you were giving it, and the thoughts you had around it caused that emotional state. Well, let's say someone calls you and you were supposed to call them, and it's been a couple of days and you'd forgot to call them, and all of a sudden they call you. The moment you look down on your phone and you see that name, what feelings are you feeling? What emotional state are you in? It's that, oh no, man, I was supposed to call them. And immediately we have that emotional response, that emotional reaction based on how we're interpreting the situation, thoughts we're having about the situation. Now, I don't remind us, because you already know this, I don't remind us of this to bring in shame or to, or especially not to mask our feelings. This is not about shoving our feelings down and not feeling them. This is nothing about pretending I'm not feeling a certain way. This is nothing about, I'm going to close my eyes and wake up and I'm just going to be, I'm happy, life is good. No, emotional ownership is a phrase that I've coined in regards to creating an awareness of how our thoughts create our emotional state. Now, again, we know this, but I wanted to bring up a few examples to remind us, because here's the thing. The moment I start realizing, it wasn't me forgetting to call Susan that created that emotional response. It was me. It was the thoughts I had around it. It wasn't me forgetting to take my kids' lunch to school, where once I realized it and had that panic attack. It wasn't the lunch. It wasn't my kids. It was the way I interpreted that situation, the way I saw that situation that created it. Because the moment I can take emotional ownership of my life is the moment I realize I create my emotional state based on how I see the world around me. Again, this is not to shame us. It is to empower us, because the moment I realize I create this emotional state is the moment I realize I can change this emotional state by seeing the world around me differently. And just something as simple as your kid talking back to you. When they talk back to you, if I'm angry and upset because they're talking back to me, what thoughts am I having in that moment? Probably, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't talk back to me. I'm the parent. This is so disrespectful. This is ridiculous. I can't believe he's acting that way. But if I were to change my thoughts to realize the moment my kid talks back to me, to think, wow, my kid's a scientist. He's experimenting with what happens when he talks back to me. Wow, isn't this an interesting experiment? Now, I know that's a really cheesy response, but could you imagine being in that moment when your kid does say, Dad, you're a jerk, or when your kid does talk back, or when they don't do their chores around the house? What would it be like to be in that emotional state to where there was just no emotion there? To where your kid doesn't do the chores they're supposed to. It's so hard not to call them contributions, because in our workshops we call them contributions, not chores. But what would that be like if I could just be with no emotion? They didn't do their chores or contributions. Now what? Now here's a consequence. And imagine what that would be like to be able to turn to your kid and just go, oh, dude, that's a bummer. Man, oh, I know you were really wanting to go out tonight. I don't blame you. I love going out too, but oh man, this stinks. I allow kids to go out that have finished all their contributions or finished all their chores. And what would that be like in your home if you could respond with just no emotion other than just empathy? Empathy for them to where, man, this stinks. You just made your life more difficult. Like, I wanted you to be able to go out. But man, I allow kids to go out that finish their chores. And so the first step of emotional ownership is to start creating that awareness of, where are my emotions coming from? What thoughts am I having about the situation that are creating me to feel what I'm feeling? Now, obviously, we're talking about this as parenting, but doesn't this also apply to your neighbor? Does this also apply to your spouse? What stories are you telling yourself when you go and find your spouse's shoes on the ground and you've asked them multiple times? Is your thought of, oh man, I can't believe my spouse isn't listening to me. This is ridiculous. I've asked them so many times to pick up their shoes and their shoes are not there. And is that where your mind is going, or is it going into another direction? And so again, what you think about, the thoughts you have about that particular situation, the lens in which you're seeing it, all work together to determine your emotional response. And that's why it's so powerful that we teach in our emotional ownership course, to where getting out of our world and into our kids' world. Because when I have a greater understanding of what's going on in their world, I'm less likely to take what they do and what they say personal. I'm less likely to look at it as them doing to me versus them living in a way and how they see the world around them. And so when they don't clean their room, again, am I seeing in a way of, so disrespectful, I asked them to clean it, this is ridiculous? Or in reality, is it that to them it just doesn't bother them to have a messy room? And it just doesn't, think that it's that big of a deal. So are they doing it to fight against you? Or are they just living in a way in how they see the world around them? And so my challenge to you is to be aware of the thoughts that you have when situations come up. Be aware of the stories that you tell yourself. And hey, good luck to you, and remember to return to gratitude.